Hi guys, today we are going to study another literary work, a famous poem written by Langston Hughes. First, let's take a look at Langston Hughes' biography. Langston Hughes is one of the most prominent writers during Harlem Renaissance, and he was a poet, novelist, essayist, and also a playwright. Langston Hughes was born in Joplin, Missouri, and he spent all his life writing and traveling. His ideas, his thoughts influenced many of the African American writers. He spent his life in the pursuit of freedom and democracy. He believed in the lines of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Langston Hughes personally faced all of the troubles and hardships of life, but he found precious things out of these hardships. Hughes learned how to be strong at an early age. When he was an infant, his father went to Mexico and separated from them. His mother had to move to different cities to find a suitable job. Therefore, he spent his childhood with his grandma. Langston Hughes was an avid reader since he was a child. He was a little child. He says, "It was that books began to happen to me, and I began to believe in nothing but books and the wonderful world in books, where if people suffered, they suffered in beautiful language, not in monosyllables as we did in Kansas." After he went to high school, Langston Hughes continued to write poetry. Hughes went to Mexico to see his father when he studied in high school. His famous poem, the Negro Speaks of River, was written on his way to Mexico. After a long time of resisting racism, he finally found a job on a boat on a ship sailing for Africa. His struggle of the black, of the Negro in a white world began from this trip. He wrote this poem in about 15 minutes as he wondered about what this mandatory trip had meant to the thousands of enslaved Africans as they traveled to America to be sold and treated like animals. This thought then led him to think about the rivers of the past, in fact, his African past. Hughes traveled to Africa, then later to Europe. He always had to work hard, else he would die of hunger. However, in 1925 he received his happiest holiday gift, which was a scholarship to Lincoln University, and he enjoyed his life at Lincoln University, where he studied literature and wrote poetry. After he graduated from Lincoln University in 1929, Hughes moved to New York and lived in Harlem. And you know that Harlem is the center of African American culture in New York City. Hughes was the first African American writer who earned a living solely through writing literary works. He shows his tendency to literature through these lines perfectly. "I would have to make my own living again, so I determined to make it writing. I did. Shortly poetry became bread, prose shelter and raiment, words turned into songs, plays, scenarios, and articles." One of the ways that Hughes rebuked the racism was to write an authentic history in his poems. He documented ancient African history as a means to, to teach the race that their history began in ancient Africa. He makes a historical link or connection between the ancient African and African American history through these words in the poem. The important rivers of both the Mississippi, the Nile, and ancient dusky rivers. He uses the words ancient rivers as a metaphor to connect the two continents, to show that the enslaved Africans brought their history to America via the muddy Mississippi River. Okay, let's start reading the poem. The Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the view of human blood in human veins. Negro, the word Negro in the title of the poem, it refers to the African race. And the pronoun I, it connects African people or the history of the African people to a life-giving force in nature. I mean rivers. Known rivers as ancient as the world. The speaker maintains that he and his ancestors, his African ancestors, have a great understanding of natural forces and the elements of nature that even precede civilization, the nature that even um, and the natural forces that even precede civilization. Then the speaker talks about rivers as outer natural forces in the first two lines. But in line three, he compares human body to the earth and he likens rivers to human blood in human veins. So rivers are the blood, the life-giving liquid on the earth. My soul has grown deep like rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. Well, in line 4, he likens the depths of his soul to the depths of rivers. By using metaphors and symbols, the speaker associates his people, his ancestors, to these ancient rivers, and he conveys this idea that these ancient rivers are part of his blood and soul. Then in line 5, we understand that the I, the pronoun I used in this poem, does not refer to a specific person, rather, it refers to the voice of a race. To have based in the Euphrates when dawns were young, the readers can jump to a conclusion that the speaker probably is millions of years old. In lines 5 through 7, the speaker connects the African race to the great civilizations near to the vital rivers in Africa and Middle East. Euphrates River was the life-giving river of ancient Babylon. It starts from Turkey through Syria and modern Iraq. The Congo, it flows from Central Africa and it flows to the Atlantic. The Nile, which originates in Uganda in Africa and it flows into Egypt to the Mediterranean. The speaker cherished the rivers because of several reasons. Firstly, he bathes in the river. Secondly, he builds his cottage near it. Then he listens to the lullaby of the river when he retires. And when he's a slave building the great pyramids, he's mesmerized by the grandeur of the river. These lines indicate this fact that there is a strong spiritual bond between African people and nature. Langston Hughes considered Africa as a realm destroyed by colonialism and Western imperialism. Okay, next lines. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. Well, there is an analogy between these ancient rivers with Mississippi. The color of the river the Mississippi turned from muddy to the gold, referring metaphorically to the emancipation of slaves by Lincoln. So this is an image of change. The singing of the Mississippi, it can refer both to the religious songs of the African Americans and to the song of celebration after the freedom of slaves. Okay, let's read the final lines. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Well, the final lines of the poem are the repetition of the beginning lines. And so the poem is a cycle. The poem looks more like a cycle in a way that a river does. Dusky rivers, it literally means muddy rivers, but it has a secondary meaning too. It refers to the African people as their skin is dark or dusky. Well, to sum up, the speaker expresses his pride in his race, roots, ancient civilizations, and more importantly, he is proud of the strong ties with elemental forces in nature.